Well, thank you so much. Help me welcome Mr. Tommy.
I think I need a box to stand on. We'll be in good shape here. If you don't mind, I'm going to just create a little space. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. It is a rainy day, so I know everybody had to grab the umbrellas and raincoats to get out on the street and come visit. You know, we're at the end of the year, and I think many of us, when you get to this point in the year, are doing some reflecting, looking back, kind of, you know, how's the year going? Where are we headed as we get into the new year? And so what I thought I would do is just take a few minutes today to look back at kind of where the industry has been in 2024, and then we'll spend some time talking about what 2025 has to offer, which is plenty, both 24 and 25. 24 has been a full year with many opportunities ahead, and I'll talk a little bit about, as Holly mentioned, what we're seeing on the federal landscape as President Trump returns to office. But I'll talk a little bit about the state activity as well, because I really think they go hand in hand. Just for all of you who may not be aware of what LMOGA is, first let me tell you what it stands for. LMOGA, the Louisiana Mid-Continent Oil and Gas Association. We're founded in 1923. We were just celebrating our 100th anniversary here. We concluded that just a year ago. It was a proud moment for our association. We exclusively represent all sectors of Louisiana's oil and natural gas industry, both here obviously in Louisiana and then by extension of the offshore Gulf of Mexico oil and gas industry as well. Our member companies include those in exploration, production, midstream, pipeline, refining, marketing, so really anything oil and natural gas. Those companies are members of ours, and we represent them as their industry trade association here in Louisiana. We represent the energy producers and refiners along the Gulf Coast in a special way. They produce nearly 20% of our nation's energy, refine roughly 45% of total U.S. petroleum, process 51% of the nation's natural gas, and in 2023 they shipped 61% of the nation's liquefied natural gas exports, LNG, and that's something we'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. When you look back at 2024, clearly the political twists and turns of the federal elections are something many of us will be talking about for decades to come. I think our children and grandchildren, those going into political science courses and campaigns, will be studying everything that has happened this past year as they move forward. And of course, in Louisiana, the federal elections come right after what was a big election year in 2023 for state offices, everyone from the governor to the legislature and at the local level as well. From my perspective, I think it's important to point out that whether you're talking about Donald Trump and his recent victory or Governor Landry and his victory last year, both ran on platforms that included investing in and expanding American energy production. And that is something that cannot be done without investment and expansion of Louisiana's oil and natural gas industry. That means that there's opportunity to build on what is a centuries plus worth of oil and gas production and refining that has taken place in Louisiana. With the appropriate federal and state policy, we have the opportunity to expand our traditional oil and gas activity while simultaneously building upon more recent investments in technologies. And some of these technologies, if you follow the news, have allowed Gulf of Mexico oil and natural gas producers to do more with existing rigs. They are going deeper and farther. LNG companies have reached new levels of exports. We talked about that 61% number in 2023. We continue to see investments in LNG. Refineries, we believe, have an opportunity to continue to invest here in Louisiana, and we think they can operate more efficiently without overburdensome federal regulations. And I think we also see, there is opportunity to build. We have seen a lot of companies building on traditional oil and gas activity to invest in carbon reduction and carbon reducing technologies. And we think moving forward into the new administration, we will see more opportunities for companies to invest in technologies like carbon capture and storage, like the production of biofuels and biodiesel, and invest in projects that advance a hydrogen economy here in the state as well. And of course, all these opportunities for our industry would quite honestly be a welcome departure from a lot of what we've seen the last several years, where you've had, via the administration and other policymakers in Washington, D.C., going out of their way to make both our existing and future oil and gas production difficult. I talked about the Gulf of Mexico. In the Gulf of Mexico, we saw the first ever lapse here just a couple years ago of the 5-year Outer Continental Shelf leasing program. Just to give you, a quick snapshot, for decades, there has been a consistent 5-year leasing program set by the federal government that basically is the roadmap that lays out what the potential leases of which oil and gas companies from around the world compete for, what that looks like. When you're coming to the end of a 5-year plan, you know that there is a new plan that has been vetted, been run through the process, and so you have been in a regular rotation of knowing that we operate in 5-year increments, but we know that one 5-year plan is followed by the next, which allows you to really have a lot of predictability for the future. What we saw with the lapse of the plan, like I said, for the first time in history, was a lot of uncertainty injected into the system, and that has been counterproductive. We also saw a pause for a while on LNG export permits. I just talked about the significance of growing LNG opportunities in Louisiana. But that being said, the pause put in place by the federal government really had the potential of putting in jeopardy the ability of Louisiana, and quite honestly the nation, to supply natural gas to allies around the world. And quite frankly, it would rob Louisiana of the economic opportunities that we have as being a leader in that industry. And then also, I think if you look back, and this is now almost 4 years ago, as we're about to end this presidential administration, when President Biden took office, gasoline prices were on the rise, as many people are aware. Many of you called me to talk about what goes into an increase in the price of gasoline. And of course, the price of oil, which is a global commodity traded in a global market, is a large part of the makeup of the price of a gallon of gasoline when you go to the pump. However, the administration really pushed back and tried to hold refiners accountable and say that they were part of the problem. Again, it's the price of oil, which was at that time trading high, leading to increased cost. But what I thought was particularly interesting is that what we saw from the administration was, as they were going after refineries and wanting to know why they weren't producing more. By the way, refiners were producing at record rates and 96+% of capacity, which is basically almost 100%. Many of these refineries had already started to get into a posture, because only a year earlier, President Biden had said when he was running for office that he wanted to end America's refining industry as the nation would move away from fossil fuels. And so when you look at the impacts of that in the past 4 years and the impacts to refineries, I think it's important to recognize we have 15 oil refineries in Louisiana that amount for nearly 1/6 of the nation's refining capacity, with the ability to process roughly 2.9 million barrels of crude a day, and this is according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. That's important for America, and it's why policies that have made it harder to refine are something that we don't welcome. Now, that's a lot about what has happened. And I think you need to know that part of the story, because I think it helps to color a little bit of what we see from an opportunity picture going forward. As we look ahead, clearly we need federal and state policy that removes the roadblocks to American energy production, creates opportunities for those companies wanting to invest in R&D, research and development, and technology that will meet our energy demands, but also will take steps to reduce carbon emissions here at home and around the world. If we see that policy success both at the federal and at the state level, I'm confident that we will responsibly meet the energy needs of the nation, of our state, and quite honestly, the energy needs of the world. We will grow a national and state economy around energy if we see that policy success. So I see opportunity with a returning Trump administration to address many of these issues. You're going to hear, you have heard during the campaign, a lot of talk about pro-energy policy, American energy, energy security. There are many, many different ways of describing it, but clearly the president-elect, former president, has run on this. And we, if you follow Meet the Press, just yesterday, President Trump was saying that one of his first day in office items will be to take actions that will benefit American energy production. And so we are very much optimistic in reaching out and working with transition committee officials. We will be sending a letter here in the next week or so to the transition committee, basically outlining how we see Louisiana fitting into this positive step forward from an American energy standpoint. Now, the question I get a lot, whether I'm speaking with small groups, industry groups, policymakers, community leaders, is about what many people call the energy transition. And so the question is, are we at a transition point in Louisiana when it comes to energy production, energy consumption? In recent years, as we've gone through different changes, different federal and state administrations, producers and manufacturers around the world, particularly here in Louisiana, have joined, in many cases, have led in this global effort to reduce carbon emissions and grow the amount of renewable energy used by all of us as consumers. There is a market for that energy, low carbon energy. Many multinational companies with significant assets here in Louisiana, many of these companies have been part of the effort. But I do not want anyone to be mistaken. The investments by companies in carbon reduction are in addition to their traditional efforts, and that is particularly important. And I want to say that again. A lot of the efforts in carbon reduction are in addition to continued use of fossil fuels, continued oil and gas production. It is not a transition as you would describe it. Transition often means we are leaving one thing to go to the other. That is not the case. It is in addition to. The fact is that the need for oil and the need for natural gas has not diminished. According to the EIA, which I mentioned earlier, the Energy Information Administration, in 2023, petroleum and liquid fuels accounted for nearly 38% of U.S. energy consumption. 38% of U.S. energy consumption. The projections by the EIA show that U.S. consumption of petroleum and other liquids in 2050 will look very much like the consumption rates of 2023. So that means that we need policies, and we think this incoming administration will work towards continuing to put in place policy that allows our industry, allows Louisiana industry, to meet the energy demands that are going to be consistent for at least the next 25 years, while also investing in new technologies that reduce carbon emissions. Here at home, I think it's also important, we have seen the Landry administration, in the state, they have begun efforts to support not only an increase in oil and gas activity, but also they have too supported some of these new investments, like projects regarding involving carbon capture. And I truly believe, and I think this is extremely important, that a world, and I think we're moving to this place that needs more oil and natural gas to meet the energy needs globally, and a world that does truly, in an industry, want to decarbonize and reduce carbon emissions. I think a world that wants both of those very much needs Louisiana, because we can do both. We can do, in many ways, all of the above. Governor Landry joined us at our Lamoga annual meeting in February and spoke quite strongly about his support for increased energy investment, which leads to increased energy jobs here in Louisiana. If you've heard LED Secretary Bourgeois, Susan Bourgeois, she has talked extensively about the support and the desire to build on Louisiana's oil and natural gas industry, and has I know met and spoke to all of you about the opportunities of building on what is one of the key pillars of the Louisiana economy. I think that desire by both the governor's office and his administration, coupled with what we think is going to happen as the Trump administration and, quite frankly, a supportive Congress takes office in January, it gives us, our industry here in Louisiana and obviously across the country, its best opportunity to succeed. We have been and will continue to be an energy state. I don't think that is going to end anytime soon. It's an energy state that leads the nation when it comes to responsible energy production that serves the needs of the U.S. economy and the economies of many of our allies, quite frankly, via natural gas exports around the world. And that's particularly important. We do not have to do much channel surfing. Pick your favorite news station. Doesn't matter your political views. Constantly, we are watching activities around the world that are going to impact the global energy picture. The importance of those LNG exports came at a time when Russia and Ukraine were starting their war, and the need for gas in Europe was strong. We need to continue to be able to provide that. And of course, I'm not going to go take you for a tour around the world, but if you're watching clearly every day, there is something changing on a global stage. And so we do believe that there is a lot of opportunity ahead. I think we also are going to be the state, that the energy state that welcomes record investment in innovation. I think when you talk about an industry that is a century plus old, 100 plus years old, it's often common to think that things don't change. Our industry has been changing since day one, as many of our industries and many businesses and companies that we all interact with every day. Technology gets better. We learn more about the science. The skills that we require change. But we are constantly evolving. We are constantly getting better. And so I do think there's an opportunity, given just the critical mass of oil and gas industry and investment in Louisiana, for Louisiana to a place where we can see our industry really invest in innovation and new low carbon technologies. And that will allow us to be a leader. It will allow Louisiana to be a leader in carbon capture and hydrogen and the production of clean liquid fuels. If you look right now at Texas, we always like to compare ourselves to Texas and Louisiana. And when you think from a scale standpoint, clearly Texas is much larger. They have a robust oil and gas industry, a tremendous onshore industry, refineries, petrochemicals, and just by scale, they have always found ways to stay ahead of Louisiana. What we're seeing as companies are investing in carbon reduction in Louisiana is you look at the concentration of assets up and down the Mississippi River corridor in southwest Louisiana. We've seen an opportunity for Louisiana to really get out in front of Texas efforts. There was a story I read somewhere just this morning of where those companies trying to invest in carbon reduction projects are getting bogged down in some red tape. In many ways, though we want to see the industry succeed, we want that opportunity. I want that opportunity here in Louisiana. And I think as we look at some of the dollars being spent in innovation, as we see investments taking advantage of our traditional expertise in oil and gas and petrochemicals, as we see that movement forward, we do have an opportunity for Louisiana to step out ahead of Texas. And that is going to be something that will obviously add to the bottom line of the state, hopefully continue to provide career opportunities, not only for those men and women graduating high school, young men and women graduating high school and college, wanting to go in the oil and gas field. I continue to tell people that our industry is becoming a high-tech industry. Everybody follows a lot of the big tech companies, advancements in technology, and young people. I have a teenage and preteen children, both of them looking at all that is possible and exciting as we see new industries evolve around the world. The oil and gas industry, though it is 100 plus years old, more than ever is a high-tech industry. New technology is being created every single day. And so I think we will continue to see the benefits of those investments. To date, more than 300,000 people in Louisiana have their careers directly or indirectly because of Louisiana's oil and gas and energy industry. And that, right as we speak now, contributes more than $54 billion to the state's economy. We want to protect that, and I'm confident with the right state and federal policies, we can grow those statistics in a very positive way, and that will be good for both the state as well as local economies across Louisiana for decades to come. Finally, I want to just talk quickly about the impacts that this new administration and a pro-energy stance will have. We've talked a lot about what's happening in Washington, Baton Rouge. Let's talk a little bit about Louisiana communities as well. As we know, the culture of our state in many ways is defined by the many different local communities that we have. As we look at some of these pro-energy policies being written in Washington and Baton Rouge, I think we need to look at those opportunities and make sure that Louisiana's doors and the doors of small towns and parishes around the state remain open to oil and gas. We want to engage. We have been engaging with those local communities to have that conversation. Again, not about a transition, but about what we are doing to increase, to add on to our existing industry. A lot of our industry's past success has come from the ability of some of the world's largest companies, of which you know many of the names, their ability to respond to and engage with some of Louisiana's smallest communities. I'll give you a couple examples. The success of our offshore industry, our industry in the Gulf of Mexico, would not be possible without the coastal parishes and the support of the Bayou region. When you look, the ability to increase the number of local graduates, which we have desperately needed. We need that strong workforce. We need that future workforce. The ability to increase those local graduates from local high schools, local community technical colleges, from our universities, to go work in refineries and chemical plants. Those efforts have been successful because of partnerships between industry, local school districts, and local community organizations looking to create opportunities, career opportunities for local residents. That has been extremely important. And I think most recently, I've talked about carbon capture. The state's success at the end of 2023, we're coming up on the one-year anniversary, the state's success in being granted what's called Class 6 primacy. This is the EPA giving the state of Louisiana and the Department of Energy and Natural Resources the authority to issue permits for carbon capture. That success, had bipartisan support. Outgoing Governor Edwards, incoming Governor Landry, Republicans and Democrats at the legislature and in Congress. That ability for the state to receive that autonomy came because of grassroots activity from Louisianans who understand the importance of the oil and gas industry and the importance that we don't just sit still and let the world pass us by. Those local efforts have been extremely important. I can't say enough about those partnerships. I think we need to talk more about them. I think we need to be much more active and visible in our local communities. I think we do a good job of it, but there's always room to do more. When I think about a lot of the local officials who work on, serve on police juries or parish councils, school board members, sheriffs, assessors, think of everyone who makes your local community work. They are some of our greatest partners. When you add them to members of the legislature, the administration, all those people in elected and public office, we look at these public servants and see a lot of them who have run on being pro-industry candidates, being passionate about Louisiana industry, passionate about the success and economic and career opportunities that the state can have by continuing to support policies that lead to that investment. And that's particularly important because what happens in any of our parishes to make industry successful makes the industry successful. It adds to the value of the community, the state, the nation, and as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, it also adds to meeting the energy demands of this world that we live in at a time where we need it the most. Finally, before I just take a couple questions, I like to always share because I think it's extremely important that people understand around our state and our country the impacts that industry has, those local impacts I was just talking about. And I often do it by talking a little bit about my own story. Holly mentioned I worked at Dow Chemical for almost 15 years before I took over as president of LaMoga. That work in industry, that opportunity for me to continue to give back has come because I come from a family of individuals who have worked extensively in the petrochemical and oil and gas industry. Both of my grandfathers, 30-plus-year retirees of industry. My father, retiree of industry. I was the first person to go to college in my family because of the work that those men did and those who came, led and worked in our industry and communities for decades before us. They created opportunities. My story is not special or unique. It may be special, it's not unique. There are many, many generations inside of families that have worked in the oil and gas and petrochemical industry in Louisiana. Dads, sons, granddaughters, you name it. It's somewhat of a tradition. It's part of our culture. Louisiana is a great place where it can all work together. And so it is important for us to continue to advocate for that industry. We will continue to do our work as we go through this presidential transition, continue to work with the Landry administration to find ways to position Louisiana as the energy state, the energy leader that it has been for many decades. We will find ways to continue to make sure that that position not only holds firm, but that we look opportunities to expand upon it in the years and decades to come. So thank you again for having me. Appreciate all of you spending a few minutes, and I'm happy to answer some questions. All three of you at once.
Okay. On the height of the Trump administration, oil and gas consumption, what percentage did it fall under the Biden administration, under the draconian rules that he put into effect? How much less are we today getting in terms of gas and oil, et cetera?
Well, I think we're still, so this is, when I spoke earlier about the value of a 5-year plan and predictability of having 5-year plans, in this 4-year period, we've had the ability to weather some of the harsher policies. And because we're quickly returning to an environment where, I absolutely expect that we're going to see an increase in future leases put on the table pretty quickly in a new administration. I think companies have been able to do work to try to, you know, make it over the valley, if you will. Now, if this would have gone on 8 years
Did it go down or
plus,
go up?
I think it's held flat for the most part, which is good. So we've been holding our own. From a Gulf of Mexico standpoint in particular, I think there is great opportunity. When you look at the offshore industry, often from the time that a company is awarded a lease, you're 10 years out from production. So the impacts of a lapse in the leasing plan in 2022, 2023, if that would have been a protracted effort, wouldn't have been felt for 10 plus years. I think we have time, given leases that were awarded prior to the last administration, to make up some ground, and I think we're going to see that start to happen in pretty short order once we move into the new year.
Me?
Yeah.
What is the comparison with in the carbon sequestration expenditure to what they're doing, say for instance at Lake Marpol, versus planting trees, which seem to be a lot more productive for everybody than just going with underground storage?
So I think the efforts of carbon reduction by the industry, I think, you know, I don't know the one-for-one comparison between CCS and planting trees. I think they're all of value. We believe that the investments in carbon capture are going to safely provide opportunities to reduce emissions. I think environmental efforts are important as well. I talked a lot about that local engagement. I think these are conversations that communities and the industry and elected officials are having on a regular basis. The efforts to invest in carbon reduction are going to happen. And we know that investing in Louisiana, investing in Texas, it is going to help reduce, you know, the carbon footprint at a much larger level. The question is, does Louisiana want to take advantage of an opportunity, as we have, to build around the infrastructure we have here in this state, the workforce advantages we have, because we know the investments are going to happen. We want Louisiana to have the opportunity to create the jobs, increase the economic benefits. I can't tell you what the like for like is. I think it's an all of the above approach, though, that is needed.
And then just kind of sticking on that same path there with carbon capture, how do you kind of see the trajectory of that looking over the next handful of years? And I thought it was pretty interesting how you were talking about the innovation and technology. How do you think that will play into the trajectory as well?
Look, I think, so, I mean, if you look several years out, you know, we talked about the primacy decision at the end of 2023. Many companies are going through the process. It's a very rigorous process of applying for their Class 6 permits for these carbon sequestration storage wells. Obviously, we will get to a point where in the early phases of those projects, these are multi-year projects and investments. And so I think over the next several years, you'll start to actually see the benefits and the actual work being done. There have been test wells, but the lion's share of it is coming. We have to get the permitting process right. I think the EPA had confidence in the state that they could do that. That process has started. We need it to be an efficient process, as permitting across the industry in all matters what we do is a key component in the business case of getting these investments out of the door and getting the workforce hired, et cetera. But I think over the next several years we're going to start seeing these permits granted. I think we will see the outcome of the many conversations had between the industry and the communities where these projects will be permitted. So you'll start to see some of those benefits. But I think the trajectory is good. as we move into this new administration at a federal level, you're going to see a lot of talk about fossil fuels. As I said earlier, this is more an addition to, it's not going to go away. But I think there's also a market for low carbon energy. Consumers, time and time again, are showing a desire for having the opportunity to purchase products that have a lower carbon footprint. We know in Louisiana that whether it's the energy produced, the chemicals that are made from our energy and put into the manufacturing process, the carbon impact of all of that has an impact on that end-use product that someone can buy from Amazon or on the shelves of Target or Walmart. So we believe that even as we move into the new administration, though we will continue to see pro-oil and gas policies, we're not going to see a departure. And I've received this question a few times from a lot of the efforts that have led companies to invest in carbon reduction. At the end of the day, there's a market for products that are made with Louisiana energy, Louisiana petrochemicals. That's not going to go away.
The storage of carbon is highly dependent upon tax credits, which the Biden administration has pushed. And it has not been clear yet that the Trump administration is going to continue those tax credits. And until that is done, the industry will be in a hold position.
So we're going to be in a new administration here pretty quickly.
And they have not made a position yet on the tax credits, currently in the Biden administration.
Sure. So the question in the back was about the tax credits. In this case, 45Q tax credits passed during the Biden administration, and whether there will be a change from that under a Trump administration. Obviously, we're all watching President Trump and what he's going to do on many, many, many issues. However, I do think that there is been great evidence, as I said, at the consumer level for lower carbon products. And so I believe from a larger economic standpoint, I am optimistic that, yes, there could be changes. I mean, clearly there are going to be things that look differently in a Trump administration than a Biden administration, but I am optimistic that we're not going to see kind of this windshield wiper approach that goes from one place to the other. At the end of the day, I think companies are making investments based on consumer demands, the opportunity to take products to market. And so obviously we have to wait for the Trump administration to take office, but I think there is still opportunity to continue to see the policies that are supporting and leading towards a lot of investments stay in place. Oh, I'm sorry.
One more question. Why do you think Louisiana can produce new oil cheaper than West Texas?
So when I look at the offshore industry, I think we're doing more with existing assets, and so I think that's an opportunity. And quite frankly, I think I don't necessarily believe it's a one or the other, more Louisiana offshore production as opposed to Texas production. I think we need all the oil and gas we can produce for the next several decades for all the reasons that I mentioned a few moments ago. The energy needs, consumption may stay flat, but the energy needs of the world are growing as we see, not just investments obviously here domestically, but around the world. So I don't necessarily look at it as a competition between the two as to, one state, one region's product over the other. I think we need it all. And I think we've seen, and I expect with the Secretary Wright at Energy or Secretary Burgum at Interior, I think you're going to see them looking holistically at the production capabilities of the United States, both onshore and offshore, and figuring out how to maximize it all. Sure, thank you for that question. The question was, what do we see from an association standpoint as our top legislative priorities over the next 6 months. I think, look, let's start at the federal level. I think at the federal level, we want to see a return to predictable leasing in the offshore space, and regulation becoming less burdensome. And what I mean by that is we value a rigorous regulatory environment. Our industry wants it, our communities need it. And that's something we value. What we don't want to do is see a continued effort to where you end up in what I call sue and settle type environments where activists, NGOs sue you to try to force an outcome. I think we need real dialogue between the industry. And so the regulatory framework, I think, needs to be something that is less burdensome, and I think we need to see a return to offshore leasing. A predictable offshore leasing via increased leases, predictability of the future 5-year plans, et cetera. At the state level, I continue to think we're just coming out of a special session. Clearly, we've seen a lot of activity in the tax policy space. We know that we're going to be heading into another fiscal session in the spring of next year. Again, predictability is our friend. We want to know that policies that the industry is using to inform the business decisions it's making today are going to be the policies of decisions we make several years from now. That predictability is important. Now, obviously, we could get into the details of those different policies, but predictability is important. Clearly, we've seen, a significant effort here in November at the state capitol during that special session. We expect that to build. From an industry standpoint, we want those policies at a state level to help put us in the best position to take advantage of and to grow the state's economy as we have a more receptive, open, pro-energy policy coming out of Washington. I say this often. What happens in Washington, what happens in Baton Rouge, what happens in a parish courthouse, those things working together matter as much now as they ever have. Sure.
But you want to do away with burdens regulations. Give an example of what a burdensome regulation is.
So often I think what we find is we don't always see regulations that are aimed to influence a process or try to improve the relationship of these are different standards, whether it's in the refining capacity, the chemicals production. We often look at a lot of regulatory measures in the offshore space that don't necessarily stop us, but they create roadblocks that create inefficiencies to doing business. What I think we want to see when I talk about making regulation more efficient, we want to know, I think, when we go into an investment, an expansion, increased drilling activity, we want to see the rules that are set at the beginning be the rules throughout. And I think I go back to the predictability piece, I think that's extremely important. A regulation in the offshore space, for example, recently made it harder. It reduced the speed of vessels traveling through the Gulf of Mexico, trying to service offshore oil and gas, but quite frankly, to also service, investments in offshore wind. It impacted vessel traffic when you looked at the cruise industry, the larger, maritime industry. And these were regulations that, though they had broad impact, their aim was to slow down offshore oil and gas activity. It was one way of trying to reduce the ability of the industry to do business in the Gulf of Mexico. That is a regulation put in place just to make things more difficult. And so I think we welcome regulation, and I think we want a conversation that includes all stakeholders, industry, policymakers, communities that are impacted by operations, whether it's in the offshore maritime space or here up and down the Mississippi River. We want that predictability, and I think we overuse sometimes common sense regulation. I don't say that to minimize the impacts, but I think we have to account for the balance of what it takes to operate facilities that support our communities, add to the economic vitality, That also regulation, that policies that lead to regulations that give us more visibility of what the process will be start to finish, so that businesses can make business decisions. Because when they can do that, that leads to more investment, economic opportunity, more jobs, impacts at all levels. Nothing more time. Thank you all. Have a happy holidays and Merry Christmas. Appreciate all of you spending some time.
Thank you again for joining us today. Next week, we'll have Brad Brandt, the State Aviation Director, who will speak about aviation activity in the state and recent legislation that is